O Canada? More like O's Canada for Jack Flaherty, Ryan Mountcastle, and the Orioles as they take the series north of the border. We'll recap it all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, August 4th, 2023, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 6-1 win over the Blue Jays on Thursday that clinched this four-game series. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including another great day from Ryan Mountcastle, Austin Hayes getting his swing back, and Colton Cowser finally putting a good swing on a baseball. Then we'll talk about Jack Flaherty, who was dominant in his Orioles debut on Thursday afternoon. If he can keep doing that, that might be one of the best trades of the deadline that the Orioles made earlier this week. And finally, we'll preview the Buck Showalter return, Mets and Orioles at the Yard this weekend. We'll get you ready for that series coming up at the end of the pod. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms, and we're right here on YouTube. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. We're getting pretty close here to 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is thanks to you all. I'm going to do another very fun giveaway of some Orioles memorabilia once we get to 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. So all you have to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel and wait for further instructions, and we shall see who can win some fun Orioles gear. So again, get over to YouTube and subscribe. Thank you to everyone makes Locked On Orioles their first listen. The everydayers out there, it's been a fun season, and it's going to continue that way. And it continued that way on Thursday as the Orioles got a 6-1 victory over the Toronto Blue Jays on Thursday afternoon, clinching the series north of the border, taking 3 out of 4 from the Blue Jays in this one. The Orioles, with the victory on Thursday, get themselves to 67-42 on the season, tying their highest watermark of the year, 25 games over 500. And as I speak right now, the Tampa Bay Rays off on Thursday, so the Orioles will enter the weekend with a 2-game lead on Tampa. And I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 6-1 win over the Blue Jays on Thursday afternoon. And the first thing you need to know is Jack Flaherty was dominant in his Orioles debut. 6 strong innings of 1-run ball, just 4 hits allowed with 8 strikeouts and 2 walks. He didn't allow a homer on 92 pitches, just 5 hard hit balls in 6 innings against him. He had 19 whiffs, which was his second highest mark of the year. The fastball velo was up. The breaking stuff was nasty, and he got back-to-back gigantic outs in that 6th inning with a huge strikeout with 1 away and the bases loaded to keep it a 3-1 game, not let the game get away, and got the win for the Orioles. I'll break down his start in much further detail coming up a little bit later on this episode. But the second thing you need to know from this one is Ryan Mountcastle put on an absolute show in this series in Toronto. And I mean, what's new for Mountcastle, who's now hitting about .330 in his career against the Blue Jays? But this series was on another level. And it's interesting because usually Mountcastle does the damage with the homers. He came into this series with 15 career home runs in 45 games against the Blue Jays. He did not homer in these 4 games at the Rogers Center, but it did not matter because he basically got a hit every single time. Mountcastle on Thursday goes 4 for 4 with 4 singles and an RBI in this one. It was just incredible. It was incredible what he did. 4 singles, a sac fly, an RBI, 2 runs scored, 4 hard hit balls for Ryan Mountcastle on the day. All of a sudden, he's hitting .267 with a .780 OPS on the year. He's been dynamite since returning from the injured list. He went 11 for 13 starting all 4 of these games against the Blue Jays. Per Sarah Langs of MLB.com, that is the best average of that big a sample size that any Orioles player has ever had in any 4-game series. Ever. Orioles go back to 1954. That is ever. Ryan Mountcastle had one of the best 4-game series ever for an Orioles hitter. If the Orioles could play the Blue Jays all 162, Mountcastle would be better than prime Barry Bonds. It's amazing that they still pitch to him. It's incredible what he does. He's taking the ball the other way in this game. He's shooting it into right field. He's, hitting pitches outside, inside, down the heart of the plate. I mean, second inning single, 101 off the bat. Fourth inning single, 86 off the bat, but still hit it well. Fifth inning sac fly was a rocket to right field, 101 off the bat. Seventh inning single, 104 off the bat. Ninth inning single, 99 off the bat. Just a ridiculous day for Ryan Mountcastle. 11 for 13 with 0 strikeouts for Mountcastle, who hasn't struck out in his last 7 games. He's back. Third thing you need to know from this one is, speaking of being back, Austin Hays got his swagger back in this game. It has been a struggle for Hays since the All-Star break. I talked about it on Thursday's episode. Coming into Thursday's game, he was hitting 143 since he was an All-Star. Since the All-Star break, he started the All-Star game, been hitting 143 since then. He turned it around in this game. Austin Hays, 4 for 5 in this one with a double, 3 singles, and 2 RBIs, including 4 hard hit balls on the day for Hays. Just his third 4+ hit game of the year, had another 4-hit game and also had a 5-hit game earlier this season. But it was nice to finally see him barrel up the baseball a little bit and hit the ball in the air. Now, his first 2 singles were ground ball singles. And let's be honest, the 8th inning single was also a ground ball single, but the line out he had in the 5th, he hit the ball in the air, and the 9th inning double that he had, he also hit the ball in the air, had some good exit velos, took some good swings on some pitches. Maybe, just maybe, this 4-hit game will get Austin Hays going once again. Fourth thing you need to know from the Orioles' 6-1 winner of the Blue Jays on Thursday is that Colton Cowser hit a double. And I know just having 1 hit in 1 game coming off the bench doesn't generally get a player into the 5 things you need to know, but Colton Cowser absolutely needed this. Came in as a defensive replacement for Ryan O'Hearn in the bottom of the 8th inning in right field, got a chance to hit in the top of the 9th, and started the Oriole rally with a 1-out double in the 9th inning. Hit it off of Thomas Hatch, the Blue Jays' right-handed reliever, smoked the ball 106 off the bat into the right center field gap, and that kick-started a rally. The Orioles got 2 huge insurance runs in the top of the 9th inning to make it a 6-1 game that allowed them to sit down Felix Bautista and give him another day of rest, which is going to be huge for Bautista down the stretch. Any rest he can get. Yes, it was just one of the Orioles' 15 hits in Thursday's game, but this was a big one for Cowser. Just his 2nd extra base hit of the year since Cowser's been called up. Remember, he's still only hitting 115 since they brought him up. The only other extra base hit he had is that game-winning RBI double he had in the 9th inning against the Phillies last week. This was his first hit since then. So it is huge to see Cowser barrel up a ball, 106 miles per hour, the 3rd hardest hit ball he's had in his big league career. And Brandon Hyde said before the game, the reason why he started Ryan McKenna over Cowser, even against a righty, some of it was because Gausman with his splitter is kind of a reverse splits guy, although McKenna struck out twice in huge spots with the bases loaded in this game. Later, he did get down a sac bunt that allowed a run to score. However, what the Orioles could have used was Colton Cowser and a better Colton Cowser in those spots. Hyde said, it's because of the reverse splits, but he also wants Cowser to get more of a break, kind of focus on his BP as he struggles. Maybe that helped him out, get that 9th inning double. And they're going to have to keep playing Cowser. Like, Hicks is still out. Mullins is still out. Mike Elias did say the other day they're hoping sometime in early to mid-August to get both of those players back. But that's not a real timeline. And neither of them have started any rehab games yet, which means I feel like we're still at least a week away from getting Hicks or Mullins back, which means you got to continue with this Cowser-McKenna platoon in center field. If Cowser can start swinging it a little bit again, the offense becomes that much better. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' victory over the Blue Jays on Thursday is that the bullpen was absolute nails in this game. After Jack Flaherty left after 6 strong innings, Danny Coulombe came in, and it wasn't a large lead the Orioles were protecting. They had left a lot of runners on base throughout the game and were leading just 3-1 heading into the bottom of the 7th. But Coulombe, that looked like April and May Danny Coulombe. That was the best we've seen Danny pitch in a while. 1-2-3 inning with 2 strikeouts. He gets 4 whiffs on 7 swings. The knuckle curve that he threw to get the second out of the inning, the strikeout of Paul DeJong, was one of the filthiest pitches I've seen Coulomb throw all season. That was absolutely nasty. Then the O's went to Yenye Cano, who we know has been struggling a bit, but Cano goes 1-2-3 with a strikeout. He did allow 2 hard hit balls, and it still wasn't, the greatest outing of the year for Yenye Cano, but it was nice to see him get a 1-2-3. And then because the O's got the 2 in the ninth, they were able to sit down Bautista, go to Mike Baumann in the ninth inning. And although Baumann did allow a 2-out single, he was pretty efficient with a strikeout and a 0. And that was the only base runner the Orioles bullpen allowed. 3 innings, no runs, 1 hit, 4 Ks, and no walks for the Orioles pen. And it took them just 34 pitches to get through the final 3 innings of the game. That is what the O's need from these guys right now out of the bullpen. And that was maybe the best sign of this game on Thursday. Well, maybe the second best sign, right, from this 6-1 win. Best sign would be how well Jack Flaherty pitched in this one. He was dominant in his first start in an Orioles uniform. So coming up next, going to dive a little deeper into this Flaherty start, talk about what worked for him and what he was doing that he wasn't necessarily doing on the mound earlier this year with the St. Louis Cardinals. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. So the Orioles take down the Blue Jays 6-1 on Thursday afternoon to take 3 out of 4, winning the series north of the border. And a big reason why they did it on Thursday was the dominant debut of Jack Flaherty, who the Orioles acquired from the St. Louis Cardinals at the trade deadline on Tuesday, sending 3 prospects over to St. Louis in the deal. And it was the starter the Orioles desperately needed after sending Tyler Wells down to AA, not really fully trusting Cole Irvin in the number 5 spot. The Orioles absolutely needed a starting pitcher. They got him 6 minutes before the deadline in Flaherty, and he shined in his first Orioles start. Now, he's had a couple starts this year that were better with the Cardinals. This is not his best start of the season, but it was certainly one of his best. And it really makes you feel good when 2 days after arriving, really 1 day after arriving with the team, he got to Toronto on Wednesday. That's when he was activated to the roster. He pitches this well with a new catcher and a new team in a very highly contested divisional matchup against another team that could definitely be in the playoffs this year. But Flaherty, as I mentioned earlier, goes 6 strong innings, 1 run on 4 hits, 8 Ks, 2 walks, no homers, 92 pitches, and just 5 hard hit balls against him. The 19 swings and misses that Flaherty got, second most he's got in any start this year. And the 19 swings and misses, the second most that any Orioles starter has gotten in a game this year. He was just dominant. Now let's talk about what was working. First, we have to go to the fastball. This is the thing that makes Flaherty a different pitcher. His average fastball velocity was 94.1 miles per hour in Thursday's game. Now you're thinking, that's average for a lot of major league starting pitchers. Why is that such a big thing? Well, his year-long average on his fastball has been 92.9 miles per hour. So he's up more than 1 mile per hour on the fastball. And I was listening to Eno Saris of The Athletic talk on one of his podcasts this week about the Jack Flaherty deal that the Orioles made and talking about how when his velo is higher, when he's up above 93, 93 and a half, 94 with his fastball, those have been statistically his best starts of the year. And it doesn't seem like a lot. What's the difference between 92 and 94 on a fastball? It is a lot for a hitter to face, and for a pitcher, he's been a different pitcher when he's been around 94, and he did it again on Thursday. The 94.1 miles per hour was the second highest average pitch fastball velocity that Flaherty has had in any start this year. The only other time he was higher was 94.3 miles per hour back on June 6th. In that start, Flaherty struck out 8 batters. That was the last time he struck out 8 before today, when he also punched out 8 for the Orioles. If you look through his stats, comb through his Baseball Savant page, it pretty much lines up with his better starts have higher fastball velocity. And whatever the O's did, he was able to maintain that velocity, because it's not like he was just throwing 94, 95 early and then it went away. He was hitting 96 in that 6th inning when he was up over 90 pitches. He touched 97 a couple of times in this one. He was maintaining velocity, which is good, because some of the issue this year is he'll start out 95 and he'll end up at 91 by the end of an outing. He was maintaining 96 throughout the game. That is huge for the health of Flaherty after, the shoulder issues he's had for the last 2 years. You go beyond the fastball, which was pretty good, and it was, 10 of his 15 called strikes, got a lot of foul balls. He was in the strike zone a lot. The 2 breaking balls were just absurd. So Flaherty went 42% fastballs, 21% slider, 20% knuckle curve. All in all, he threw 37 breaking balls. The slider was awesome. 7 whiffs on 12 swings. The command he has of that pitch was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The slider was sitting 84, 85 to 86 in this game. That slider, of the 19 he threw, it was incredible to see what he did. 14 of those sliders were in the strike zone. He was just dotting the corner against righties. You'd see him throw the slider. It would start around the middle of the plate at the knees, break right to the corner. And nobody was swinging at it because they thought it was going to be a ball, hit the corner every single time. He did it time and time again, especially late in the game as well. Then you have the knuckle curve. That, to me, was the strikeout pitch in this one. 6 whiffs on 10 swings against that knuckle curve. That thing has some serious break. It'll break below the zone. He can throw it on the outside corner. It'll break just off the corner. It's a big, 12-6 curveball, and it is fun to watch. He was throwing it a little harder today than he generally has. That pitch has averaged about 75 miles per hour on the year. He was easily, he was sitting 77 and touched 80 on that curve today. I think it gave it a little more life, the more break he had on the pitch. I was just really impressed. And he's been going away from his cutter recently with the Cardinals, which has been a good move. That's why he had a 3 ERA in July with St. Louis. His cutter's been by far his worst pitch. He threw 12 cutters out of 92 pitches, but he did get 3 whiffs on 6 swings against that pitch. Now, the cutter did get hit pretty hard a couple of times, but it was still okay. And then he tossed in 4 changeups just to keep them on their toes. I loved what I saw from Jack Flaherty in this one. And the best thing I really saw was the 6th inning. I mean, he was cruising through 5 scoreless, only 1 hit, really quick innings. The O's have a 3-0 lead. And then he finally feels the pressure in that 6th inning. O's have that 3-run lead, so he had a little cushion to work with. But Kiermaier and Whit Merrifield single to start the inning. Brandon Belt hits a ball on the screws, but right to O'Hearn in right field for a line out. And then Vladdy Jr. just bloops a single down the right field line. It scores a run. It's 3-1 with runners on first and third and 1 out. He walks George Springer, and he's got the bases loaded with 1 out. He's at about 80 pitches. Mike Bauman's warming in the pen, but Brandon Hyde trusted his guy. And what did he do? Threw some nasty breaking balls to strike out Matt Chapman, and then he gets Alejandro Kirk to fly out to left field to end the inning. And he really did what Grayson Rodriguez kind of didn't do, right, on Wednesday, which was pitch out of that jam in the 6th and keep it close. Flaherty did just that. I was just so impressed with everything. Not every start's going to look like this, and he's going to have somewhere he looks a little more tired. He's not as effective. But if this is the pitcher that the Orioles got at this deadline, this could turn out to be exactly the guy to get them to the playoffs, help them in the playoffs, and help them take a next step in August, in September, and October here this season. But the O's get the big series win, 3 out of 4 against the Blue Jays. Next up, it's the New York Mets. And it's a New York Mets team that'll come into Camden Yards tonight that was looking very, very different about a week ago. They sold at the deadline, but their manager is still the one and only Buck Showalter, making his return to Baltimore. So coming up next, we'll talk about that a little bit and preview this weekend series between the O's and the Mets. So it's Orioles-Mets this weekend at the Yard for a 3-game series. And we're going to start by previewing the pitching matchups in this one. It'll start with a Friday night game here, 7:05 p.m. tonight. Dean Kramer taking the ball for the Orioles against the Mets in this one. 7 strong innings for Kramer. His last couple of starts, he's been good, hoping to kind of build off that one tonight. Kramer with the 4.66 ERA on the season. We'll see if he can kind of continue. We saw him Sunday on Sunday Night Baseball after the 7 innings against the Phillies last week. Only lasted 4 innings when he got a 7-0 lead, but he did strike out 7. Like to see him pitch a little deeper into the game. He'll go up against the left-hander David Peterson, who has not had a good year for the Mets. He's been up and down between AAA and the big leagues. Actually, a guy the Orioles had some interest in this offseason trying to trade for. But Peterson, the 27-year-old lefty, a 5.92 ERA in about 62 innings of work at the big league level this season. His last time out there was in relief. He's basically been pitching out of the Mets bullpen for a while, but because the Mets traded away 2 of their starters, Peterson, who has started before, don't get me wrong, he was a starter early this year, is back into the rotation. The last time he made a start for the Mets was July 8th against the Padres, allowed 3 runs, struck out 7 on 5 hits over 5 1/3. Since then, he has thrown, 6 consecutive relief appearances and has been pretty good, honestly. But he is back into the rotation against the Orioles here tonight. Then there's the Saturday game. I'll be in the ballpark Saturday night. 40th anniversary celebration for the 1983 World Series champion team. Eddie Murray bobbleheads being given out. Should be a fun night at the ballpark. Come say hi if you would like to. But that's also a 7:05 start. The Orioles will go with Kyle Gibson. He's been good lately. Kyle Gibson. He's kind of been saving this O's rotation. 6 innings and 3 consecutive starts. Last time out in Toronto on Monday night. 6 innings, 1 run, 4 hits, and 5 strikeouts. The Mets starter, as I record this right now on Thursday evening, is still TBD for Saturday's game. The reason why it's TBD, well, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, both traded out of this rotation. Peterson takes one spot. We'll see who takes the other spot. There's some guys like Jose Butto and Tyler McGill who could maybe take the spot. We'll see who ends up starting this game for the Mets. And then on Sunday, a 1:35 p.m. Eastern time start to finish off the series. Kyle Bradish takes the ball for the Orioles. Just what a job Kyle Bradish has done this year for Baltimore. Been their best pitcher. 20 starts, a 3.32 ERA. Last time out in Toronto, 7 innings, 3 runs, 7 strikeouts in Tuesday's game. He was huge. And he'll go up against the veteran lefty Jose Quintana for the Mets, who's making just his 4th start of the year. Mets finally got him back a few weeks ago from injury. He's thrown just 17 2/3 innings in those 3 starts, but he's been solid. His last one against the Royals earlier this week, 6 2/3, 3 runs, 6 hits, 2 Ks, and 2 walks from the left-hander. And you can listen to every single pitch of all 3 games this weekend series between the Mets and the Orioles and listen to that hometown Orioles radio broadcast with the SXM app through SiriusXM. Just download the app and search Orioles. And if you do download the app and listen to the games, you're probably going to hear some familiar names to you and some not so familiar names. Let's start with why there will be some not so familiar names. This Mets team, which comes in at 50-57, just got swept on the road by the Kansas City Royals, the team that I have maintained is actually worse than the A's this year and is the worst team in baseball. The Mets just got swept by the Royals on the road. They look terrible right now. They are 7.5 back in the wild card. They are 50-58. I misspoke after being swept by the Royals. But this team looks a lot different because they did sell at the deadline. Justin Verlander sent to the Astros. Orioles were apparently in on trying to get Verlander. Max Scherzer traded to the Rangers. They also traded away Mark Canha to the Brewers. Tommy Pham went to the Diamondbacks. Eduardo Escobar went to the Angels. Dominic Leone, a reliever, also went to the Angels. Their closer, David Robertson, went to the Marlins. They basically traded away 3 guys from your starting lineup, 2 of your starting pitchers, and 2 of your main relievers, all at the deadline. So this team is going to look very, very different when they get to Camden Yards tonight. And some of those guys that they call up from AAA, you may not know their names. But there's also some names you're going to see in here that you'll be like, wow, I missed that guy and I forgot about that guy. Because one thing the Mets have been this year is like the awesome and best team ever for remembering that old Orioles guy. They have had a lot of former O's on the team this year. And you got to think a big part of that is Buck Showalter is the Mets manager. He makes his return to Camden Yards tonight for the first time since he parted ways with the Orioles after the 2018 season. Good article in The Athletic from Britt Giroli on Thursday, talking to Buck just about, how happy he is to see the Orioles kind of get back to their winning ways, and he's excited to be back in the ballpark. I'll be giving him a standing ovation. You should too. I know that his last huge decision as Orioles manager was not a good one in the 2016 wildcard game, but otherwise, he did some amazing things for baseball in Baltimore, and I will always love and appreciate Buck Showalter for that. It'll be cool to see him come back. But in terms of guys who are on the current roster for the Mets that are definitely, it looks like, coming to Baltimore, here's the former Orioles. Reed Garrett, remember him from earlier this year? Jonathan Arauz, remember him from last year? Yeah, he just got called up to the Mets. Oh, yeah. DJ Stewart has been in the Mets starting lineup for the last 3 weeks. If you were wondering what happened to DJ Stewart after the Orioles released him this offseason, he's on the New York Mets. He still is struggling to catch fly balls, but he's hitting a little bit. Then in AAA with the Syracuse Mets, there's plenty more who have gone through this Mets system this year. Currently in AAA, Jimmy Yacobonis is on the Syracuse Mets roster. Remember him? Tommy Hunter had been with the big league Mets multiple times this year, but has been struggling with some injuries. And then some other guys who were with the AAA Mets this year, TJ McFarland. He was also in the big leagues for a bit. The Orioles have since signed him to a minor league deal. He's now in Norfolk, reunion with him. Denyi Reyes, you may remember him from the Orioles last year. He was in AAA with the Mets for a while. Dylan Bundy was in AAA with the Mets this year, had like a 12 ERA and was released last week. And Zach Muckenhern, who was a AAA reliever with the Orioles for a while, who never made the bigs, also was in AAA and the big leagues for a bit with the Mets this season. Basically, the old Orioles have all been with the Mets, and you got to think Buck Showalter just can't help himself bringing in former Orioles. So the question is, besides the former O's, who's left on this Mets team? Well, they still got Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, all having good seasons. Francisco Alvarez, the rookie catcher, has been great. The starting pitching has just been gutted. It's not very good. And the bullpen, after losing Robertson, it's shaky. They still got some veterans like Brooks Raley and Adam Ottavino in there, some names we know from the AL East. But generally, this is not a good team right now. They traded away a lot of their good players. They still have some good hitters. The offense is still dangerous. The O's should be able to rake against this pitching staff. And I'm going to be honest, at the very least, you got to win this series. The O's have a really good chance of sweeping a really bad Mets team in Baltimore this weekend. And then after that series ends, I'll be back with you on Monday, recapping the entire 3-game set between the O's and the Mets. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.